All right, my name's Ken Delata. I'm the county conservationist for Oconto County. And I guess to just go over a few things quick before I turn this over to Dale and Ryan. For those of you new to Zoom, if you look around your screen in the bottom left corner, there's a little microphone there that says mute under it, and it says another icon that says stop video. We ask that everyone mute while we're on there so we don't get background noise when someone's talking. If you have a question, in the middle of the screen, there's some icons there that says participants, then chat. You can click on that chat button and actually type a message in there, and we will be watching that. So when Ryan's talking, we'll let them know that we don't miss a question or something. Also, if you have a question that pertains right to a certain spot, just wait till an opportune time and you can unmute yourself and jump in and ask a question. We will have question and answers at the end and some discussion. So yeah, so if everyone can just mute yourselves while we're going through this. If you have a poor internet connection, they say you can click on your stop video and then it don't take up so much of your Wi-Fi or internet. And it should help if you're getting choppy pictures. You'll still be able to hear us and you'll still be able to see us. So, and with that, the other thing I am going to do is share my screen. So everyone should be able to see on here that it's on the wrong screen. Can everyone see the county website? Or Ryan, can you, or? No. Ryan or Sarah, can you see our county website screen on there?
I see your desktop.
Okay. Oh, yeah, I was muted. Yeah, I see your desktop, not the presentation.
How do we do this? We got to do.
Stop and share again, and then choose your monitor, maybe.
Ken, how about you slide that screen over to your monitor?
Nope. Great.
Looks like now you're not sharing.
Is that what it is? Let me see what you get here.
Yeah, start sharing again and then choose a.
How's that?
Yep, there you go.
All right.
Well, we'll do it that way.
Yeah. Okay, so all this information that, and we started this in the beginning of the project, but everything's saved on the county website under our department. And so I just wanted to go through quick and show you where you can find all the information that's going to be presented tonight and afterwards. So you go up to the departments tab here. You click on that. You drop down on the left-hand side, you'll see land and water conservation. You click on that, it brings you to our webpage. All kinds of good information here, but the one that you're going to want to go to is the county waterways and aquatic invasive species. Click on that one. And here's where we got all our stuff for invasive species, Healthy Waters Cost Share Program. The bottom one is the county cost share program. And then we have the countywide lake study. So that will get you into all this information. It brings you to this page and you can go through all these if you want. The first one's operational strategy and plan for surface water management. That's the overall for the county. Countywide lake survey, Dale will talk about just a little bit. Individual lake summary and plans. That's probably going to be the main one you want to go to. This next one down is the Oconto County All Lake Summary and Draft. That one there, Ryan will talk a little bit about. It takes all the lakes that we've done so far and adds them in, and you get nice little charts in there that compares water clarity to each lake and so on, and different things, how many weeds and whatever. But that it's kind of interesting if you want to look at lakes around the area also. And then the projects update, Dale will talk a little bit about that. We have been starting to put on here, as you can see below that, your Meet Your Scientist meetings. We are recording this meeting, so we will be placing it on here after the meeting. It takes us probably about a week,
right?
I'm guessing to get it out there. But so if one of your neighbors or someone didn't get to join tonight and wants to see it, they are welcome to watch it. The other thing we have is you look below that is the individual lake surveys. And this here takes, and we ask everyone to take this, and you can see Lucille Lake here You just click on it. It's like 15 real easy questions, and it's your opinion on the lake. We ask everyone to take this. You can still take it. Keep taking it while we're doing the plan writing. It's just your opinions of the lake, what you like about it, what you dislike about it, what you think should be protected, what should be corrected, and so on. If you have 5 of you in your house, each one can take it individual, and you don't have to live on the lake to take it, just if you're familiar with the lake. So we ask everyone to make sure and take that if you haven't already, because Ryan does incorporate that into the plan on what the residents' opinion are of the lake. So with that, that's mainly what I have. And I guess I'll turn over to Dale Moore from Extension, so he can give you a quick little talk.
Thanks, Ken. Good evening, everyone. Ken did say that I'm from the Extension. I've been working in the county for, well, about 16 years now. And one thing I always like is when working on a project or being part of a club or a group, and there's always some effort to come together, it's always nice to know a little bit about the history. So for those of you who don't like to know about history, bear with me. But we're just going to go through some slides to give you a better context of how your lake management plan fits into the entirety of water management planning within Oconto County. Let's see. So hopefully everybody can see that. Within Oconto County, we're unique to the northern part of the state of Wisconsin. We're very large. We're a large county. We don't have that large of a population, 37,000 some folks.
Dale, sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
Highlight the next slide there. We're still on the first slide.
Oh,
just
how's that?
Click on that second slide. At least I'm still seeing the first slide. I don't know if others are.
I am also seeing the first slide.
All right, well, we're going to fix that.
Just on that left side, you could probably just click on the second slide. Or yeah, go to that presentation button there.
Here. All right, let me see. Click that one.
There you go.
Yep. Perfect.
Okay. Apparently I got, that's the problem when you got 3 monitors and 2 keyboards.
Yeah.
It keeps switching. All right. So anyway, here's a very colorful map of the county. We're large counties, some 81 miles in length, 37,000 some folks that live here year round. About 65% of the population of the workforce actually leaves every day and comes back. Our county seat is that yellow cross in the eastern part of the map there on the bay, and that houses the 31 supervisors for the county. The circle that I have in the upper left, that's the majority of where our lakes are. Other than the Bay of Green Bay, our water resources are up there if you're looking at lakes. Unfortunately, we only have about 3 supervisors out of the 31. So when you start looking at county involvement and the history of county getting as an issue of priority, we're really weighing those water resources against law enforcement, sheriff, health and human services, as well as highway. So those are the top 3. And so with that, we don't really have a lot of priority with the water. Okay. It's not that people hate the water. It's just that at county government and county departments, we go where the need is. So there's a lot of issues that the county deals with. And one thing that helps us guide how we're going to address water issues is Ken's department, Land and Water Conservation Department. They will put together every 5 years a 10-year basically plan in which to address key issues and concerns of the locals within the county. And a few years ago, we did hold that meeting. We brought in agribusiness folks, the people that live along the water, sports people, that sort of thing. And the issues that came up were quite broad, had a lot of concern to it if we didn't address it at all. And the one thing is that they left us with is that that group, after meeting over a series of evenings, wanted us to have the healthiest waters in Wisconsin. So we chose that as sort of our rally cry or a vision, is to try to have the healthiest waters in Wisconsin. So we did develop a 10-year plan. Um, when Ken and I got together after those meetings, we were just frustrated because Ken's only got a small staff. I've got a support staff, a secretary, if you will, in the office, and that's it. And we're trying to figure out how are we going to deal with all these issues. Well, one of the things that we thought that we would do is identify how we could break that effort up. And we do realize that if you have multiple hands, many hands make light work, so to say. Um, we thought, well, who else can we get involved here? Who else has money, deep pockets? Who else can actually incorporate maybe the studies of the water into their programming? So we thought that, okay, if we could actually focus on getting other people involved, that would be key. We also wanted to listen and discuss and figure out who we had to get in front of with these water issues, primarily the county board and other departments as well. But we wanted to get out there and see what can we do. But we had to listen to the folks that are living and utilizing the waterways as well and say, okay, what are your concerns, and get that in front of the people that can actually make change. And then the third one option is on the top is we thought that we could develop a base of information. One of the concerns is that with Ken's department, they do a lot of great stuff, shoreline restoration, fish sticks, that sort of thing. But the question was, what's the impact overall? And we really didn't know what the state of the lakes were. So in a sense, you got state of the state of the union. We didn't know what the state of the lakes were at all. So with over 300 plus lakes within the county, we thought we need to somehow address that concern, give us a benchmark. So as far as making many hands within the organization, we looked at incorporating the DNR biologists as well as the fisheries, trying to get them to schedule their workload to coincide with our project. And then that's worked out very well over the past few years. We've become part of their cycle of getting out on the lakes as well as doing their fish studies. Getting in front of lake associations and districts for the ultimate volunteer work, as well as to see what we can glean from those groups. And then the scientists and staff at Stevens Point. That's the group that we've hired to use their expertise to get back out on the lake, but more importantly, to analyze and then develop documentation that we needed. So we did feel that we developed a very strong group. We also helped work with the Ocala, the Oconto County Lakes and Waterways Association. Again, get their perspective and to get their ability to reach out and get to those lake districts and other volunteers. As far as awareness and listening, we were able to conduct first thing that we did was we created a new group called the Citizen Advisory Committee, primarily made up of members of Ocala. That new committee meets with land conservation at the county level and extension, and we throw out ideas that we want to work on and issues that come up. And it's a two-way street now. We've never had that before. We hope the lake associations and even property owners can go now to Ocala, voice their concerns or issues that they may have, and that's fed through that new network of citizen advisory to our staff. So anyway, we were able to create that new group. The other thing that we did was we had a scientific survey of over 400 residents and those that live along the waterways fill out surveys. We were able to present that to the county board. We were also able to develop individual lake surveys that Ken highlighted, and we really need you to fill out to make these documents more important to the future and getting this stuff actually being dealt with. Let's see. Oh, we took a lot of the information, the concerns, whether it was no wake, hours of operation, permits for special events, whether it's something that a sports bar is doing, or if somebody's got something for a fish tournament. And we brought those concerns to each of the departments in mass: the Sheriff's Department, Health and Human Services, Parks Department, And we said, and even the highway department, and we asked them, what is it that you could do to address those concerns? And what was nice is that we didn't just get one response of hands up in the air type of thing. We had, oh, well, we can do this, 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 and this. So what we did is we documented all the 16 goals or 16 issues within the county. We got the department responses on what they could do. We presented that to the county board, and it was unanimous. 31 supervisors voted to use that as a guide for their departments now. So if it's going to be a new boat landing or a road that's going by a lake, highway department's going to make sure that they do not dump the water directly into the lake. Okay, in the past, get the water off the road was the mantra. Now it's let's get it into a retention or slow it down before it gets into the lake. Okay, so that is a great document out there that was adopted just a couple of years ago, all from listening to people's concerns and bringing it to the right people. The county board, after listening to a number of presentations from Lake Association members and ourselves, dedicated $230,000 to a Healthy Waters initiative that we're able to help the lake associations with grant submittals. So we've been able to do a lot where we're listening and taking it to the right group of people. The last thing, which is really what encompasses this document that you're going to have tonight, be presented by Ryan, is how did we come up with the lake management studies for 60 lakes? We knew that we had 300 lakes that could be impacted through AIS and terrestrial invasives, but we really thought to have an impact and to set that baseline, we should look at the 60 lakes that we know that have public access. They're the most likely that's going to have that in and out of boats, bringing in things. And let's just focus. If we could just look at those 60 lakes. So you just happen to be one of those 60 lakes. We were looking at a 2-year study, which, we're going to have, which makes it very difficult for the planners and us because we didn't do all 60 lakes at one time. We're doing roughly 6 or 7 lakes a year, and it's over a 2-year period. So we're constantly doing a hopscotch. So a year ago, when this kicked off, we had our Meet the Scientists to let everybody know on your lake that we were starting the process. And now 2 years later, we're here to tell you what we've gathered. So with that, we tried to make people aware of each of the steps, what it is that we're doing, and that became this update guide. Okay, the status of the lake. So really, if you were a resident and said, I didn't know anything that's going on, who's doing studies and that, anybody should be able to get this document, whether it's on our website from an association, a district, or even Ocala. They're out there. They have the latest date in the upper right corner that, in the yellow, that says when it was updated, and you can hand it to a neighbor and basically walk away, and they should be able to read through it and understand exactly what it is we're doing. It's only 8 pages long. It has all our email links that Ken had that he was showing how to get there. There's actually some email links that you could just type right in and it goes right there. It has some imagery of the surveys as well as the other documents that were adopted about this project in its entirety. But most importantly, it has each of the lakes named and when the tentative dates for the goal to be completed by. So if somebody is looking at that and they were one of the first 7 lakes and they just found out about the planning now, they could look at this document and say, oh, we're already done. Yes, they could go right to their data. If they're not part of the process until this year, just starting, they look on that and say, oh, okay, our study doesn't really start until the summer of 2021. So it does have the number of all the lakes that we're working on with the to-do and the type of project that's actually being underway. Now, how did we get there? If you go back to the whole Ken thing where you found us on that website, that update, Lakes Project Update is right there. So all you got to do is click it and print it off. If you don't have a printer, just contact us, email us, or Ocala. We'll have a bunch of those copies as well. So thank you for bearing with me on this. I think a little bit of history will go a long way. And I'm just going to take this time then to turn it over to Ryan. Ryan, are you there?
I'm here.
All right, I'm going to do, let's see.
I think I can just steal it from you there.
I got it right there. What's that?
Yeah, are people seeing my presentation now? Okay.
I can see it.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks, Dale. And so my name is Ryan Haney. I'm from University of Wisconsin at Stevens Point. As Dale and Ken mentioned, we've partnered with the county to help get people through this process and be part of the many hands at work here. I encourage you to visit the county website where, again, you can find all this information, whether it be the schedule that Dale was just talking about, or copies of reports, things like that. You're receiving a lot of information tonight. So if you go to the county website, you can really peruse all that information at your leisure. And if you need hard copies or something, contact Ken or Dale or Steve, and they can get those for you. So I'm here tonight to kind of present basically the baseline data that we gathered for Underwood, which is really the starting point of a plan. We need to know where we are to decide, to figure out where we're going to go. And also I have Sarah here, my colleague, Tammy Paoli, the fishery biologist, and Brendan Ordine, the lake biologist, who's not on yet. She had attended something in the field, but will be on soon. We'll also be here. So you have a lot of resources available here tonight to answer questions. So please, for me, interrupt at any time if you have a question. We'll also have some discussion at the end. And I also wanted to reiterate these surveys for anybody to take. Those can also be found on the county website, but that really quantifies what the perspectives of the residents and the lake users are, and helps justify a lot of the objectives in the plan. So we really want to capture that. And it's also a great opportunity for people who may not be able to attend these meetings to have their 2 cents in as well. So with that, like I say, please interrupt me if you heard. I may need an update. Again, this is information we gathered over the 2-year period, 2017, 2018, I believe, or was it 18-19 already? I think it was 2018-19, and then anything else that we could really come across here. So again, just to orient you here with the project framework, we're developing lake management plans, which requires some baseline data for all the public access lakes in Oconto County. And what is a lake management plan? Why are we even going through this process? Lake management plan is really designed to be a clearinghouse of information about your lake. There are a variety of entities involved with your lake, whether it be the DNR working on something, a sportsman's club, a lake association, individuals doing things with their own property. Up in your neck of the woods, maybe it's Forest Service or Highway Department comes into play, the town when it comes to boat landings, things like that. So there's a whole lot of people that are involved in your lake at any given time. And so the lake management plan is really meant to house a comprehensive kind of look at your lake, everything we know about it, and combine that with the visions and objectives that the residents of the lake really have, and what the kind of things change they would like to see, or the kind of things they would like to protect. You guys live there, you guys see it every day, and you guys have the most stake in it. So we really invite you to be a part of this process. So the planning process was, like I said, was a 2-year lake study, really to gather some baseline data. Some lakes have a lot of historical data going back, others have virtually none. And so to really be able to compare apples to apples and get an updated view of these lakes, we did a 2-year lake study of a variety of things that you're going to hear about tonight, the results of. And I remind you that a 2-year study is really a brief snapshot in time. These lakes are 10,000 years old, a lot of them, and to study them for two years is pretty presumptuous that we would understand them at that point, but it's what we have to go on. So going forward, ongoing monitoring, ongoing gathering of data will be really important to identify what the trends are that we're seeing in that data. I can tell you what we gathered from the 2 years, but there'll be still a lot of unanswered questions. And so now we're in the management plan development. We're having some public meetings, getting your input. When this plan is completed, it'll go on file with the town, with the county, with the DNR, and all these various agencies will be aware of this plan. So again, it can be a point of reference when it comes to information about your lake and what the visions and objectives of the residents there are. That being said, it's also designed to be a living document. There will constantly be new information, new objectives that arise. So this document is really intended to be updated annually if need be, but certainly every 5 to 10 years as things change and as we learn more about the lake. And so I invite you to make that happen. However it might, that's currently beyond the scope of our current grants, but hopefully people will pick up the reins once they have this document. So briefly here under chapter NR 193 are the requirements of a lake management plan. Again, it's a very comprehensive sort of approach. Lake management plans are increasingly required for support from the state, for cost sharing, for grants, for resources, because they want to put their money with lakes that have a holistic view of their lake and understand how their lake works and aren't just have tunnel vision about one specific topic. To understand how a lake works, you really have to take these comprehensive look at it. And so here's all the parameters. So whether it be the physical data or hard science or understanding what your watershed is comprised of, understanding how the phosphorus inputs to your lake can be modeled, or what the riparian land ownership is, who to see about getting your boat launch fixed, aquatic plants, invasive species. There's a variety of things that all go in here. And our 2-year study has basically developed a baseline of information of all this stuff. And so there's a lot of technical stuff involved here. And so the process that we've primarily been using in this is that our staff at UWSP gathers and summarizes this information and creates an initial draft of your lake management plan that addresses all those components. And you see some pages here from your plan that I've already begun a draft of, and it really is just kind of summarizing information. There's a variety of chapters that address all those different components. And then at the bottom right, you'll see at the end of each chapter, what we haven't to fill out yet are the goals, objectives, and actions we're going to take regarding each of those subjects. And so that's where we really need your input combined with the science as we understand it, and combined with the regulations that govern this sort of thing. So with that, our first topic is going to be fisheries, and I'm going to hand it off to Tammy Paoli, the fishery biologist, to update us on what she knows about the fishery in the lake.
All right, bear with me while I get my screen shared here. Let me know when you can see it.
I can see it.
All right, perfect. Well, thanks, Ryan. My name is Tammy Paoli. I'm a fisheries biologist with the Wisconsin DNR out of the Peshtigo office. I work in Oconto County, south of Highway 64 on inland waters, and also I work on Green Bay waters. My counterpart, Chip Long, he works in Oconto County, north of Highway 64, and also inland Marinette County. So I'm going to run you through what we know about Underwood Lake fisheries. So Underwood Lake is a 45-acre seepage lake, meaning there's no inlet or outlet, with a max depth of around 35 feet and averaging around 15 feet. The littoral substrate is mostly sand and muck, and the shoreline is mostly upland hardwoods, with one boat landing in the upper corner, which you all know where that is. The lake follows our general inland fishing regulations. There are no special regulations on Underwood Lake, so I just wanted to throw up a table just showing what those general fishing regulations are for the lake. For such a small lake, Underwood Lake actually has a pretty extensive stocking history. Going back into the files back to 1980, there were some northern pike that were stocked through the federal hatchery. I'm not sure of the history or reason or how those fish were obtained. And then there's a gap where there is no stocking information available. But then in the early 2000s, walleye were stocked through the Lake Association, and you can see that through this table, different numbers and sizes of fish throughout the years. There were some yellow perch also stocked beginning in 2007, and again a few years later in 2011. And so walleye were stocked pretty regularly, and these are large fingerling size, meaning they're about 6 to 8 inches in size. So those are the walleye that typically have good survival in most lakes versus fry stocking, which sometimes occurs. And so moving forward past 2012, we again, have this pretty regular walleye stocking that's been occurring, and then throw in some yellow perch in 2017, and then 2 years ago the Lake Association wanted to try something different, so they put 500 adult black crappie in there. So as you can see, we have a lot of walleye that have gone into the lake throughout the time period. So our last survey that we completed on Underwood Lake was in 2015, and this was an electrofishing survey done on May 27th. It's an evening survey. The photo I show here, I just wanted to give you an idea of what type of gear we're using. This is called our boom shocking boat, where we can use it to survey in shallow areas of the lake. So we go along the shoreline of the lake in the shallowest parts that we can get into at nighttime when the game fish particularly are in shallow waters to feed. And so this was an evening survey, not a daytime survey like this photo is at, but this is what our boat looks like. And so for that survey, we shocked the entire 1.2 miles of shoreline. I will say it was a little bit interesting trying to get our boat down into the boat landing. It was starting to get dark by the time we actually got there, and so we weren't really even sure where the boat landing was. So it's pretty well, it was pretty well camouflaged, I should say, and the road down to it at the time was a little bit interesting, but we managed to get this giant thing down there and turned around and got it into the water. The last electrofishing survey that we did was in 2006. So a lot of our lakes, depending on the size, are on a 10-year rotation, and some lakes come up for what we call SE2 surveys, or spring electrofishing 2 surveys, which is what this survey was, targeting bass and panfish primarily. And some lakes that are 100 acres or over that also have a public boat landing or public access, those lakes often get a spring netting survey for a week or 2 during ice out. But because this is a smaller lake, it just falls under our electrofishing survey to be done once every 10 years. So the results of that survey, we had 123 fish of 8 species. Largemouth bass were the most abundant. Bluegill were common, but we also caught some black crappie, pumpkin seed, rock bass, green sunfish, and yellow bullhead. And not surprising that bass and bluegill were most common in this survey. And that's really kind of what the survey is designed to really get an assessment of. We did also catch 4 recently stocked walleye. These were, fish that were likely stocked the year before. We did not catch any adult walleye during this survey. So when we looked at the data and we compared it to our last survey, we found that our bluegill size structure, meaning the overall average of bluegill, has improved quite a bit since 2006. So the black bars are the 2015 survey, and the gray bars here are the 2006 survey. But abundance had declined quite a bit, very noticeably. I mean, they had 251 bluegill in 2006, we only had 36. But again, size structure was much improved. Looking back on some of the previous reports and information on Underwood Lake had had a history of very abundant but stunted bluegill populations going back into the 70s. And so we were happy to see that that wasn't the case. We would have liked to see more bluegill, of course, but we didn't see any signs of stunted fish. So that was encouraging. When we looked at our largemouth bass, we also kind of on the flip side, I guess, we had a high density of largemouth bass that were slow growing. And I'll show you a graph and describe some of the aging information here soon. So we caught 61 largemouth bass per mile, which is considered a pretty high density. And again, this graph shows the 2015 length numbers of fish with a length on the bottom and the numbers of fish caught on the side here on the y-axis. And in 2006 are the gray bars. So pretty similar numbers of fish, 67 in 06 and 73 in 2015. You can see our size structure shifted maybe a little bit with more 10 and 11 inches caught. But what we're really interested in seeing how many of these legal size fish we caught. I mean, those are the ones that anglers are able to keep 14 inches or larger. And we didn't catch many at all. You know, we only caught four legal size fish out of 73. So certainly, you know, growth is an issue. And size structure also is an issue for largemouth bass in Underwood Lake. One of the things we often do in these surveys is we collect different aging structures from fish, whether it be scales or part of a fin ray that we can age. And so the reason we like to do this is because we want to know, this gives us an idea of the health of the fishery. How much competition is there for food? So we look at how old is a 6-inch bluegill in Underwood Lake, and this line right here with the black triangles shows the ages of fish and the length of that sample that we collected. This line here with the circles and dashes is the Northeast Wisconsin average. So when you throw this black line above here for Underwood Lake, you can see the growth rates for bluegill are above one of our typical lakes in the area. So that's very encouraging. We like to see that. So this is not a stunted population of bluegill. It's definitely a low abundance, but stunting is not an issue. Now, if we then take this line, this orange line here, and look across at 6 inches, where does it hit this black line for Underwood Lake? And that's about at age 3. So it takes about 3 years old for a bluegill to get to be 6 inches, which again is about a year faster than most lakes. And so that's a good thing. So our bluegill growth is well above average compared to other lakes in Wisconsin. The largest bluegill that we caught in the survey was 10.8 inches, this triangle right here, and that was a 7-inch bluegill. Again, you know, often you might rarely not even see a 10-inch bluegill, and this graph kind of averages out. But if you do, it's probably more like 10 or 11 years old and not 7 years old. So this is good to know for Underwood Lake and encouraging to know that the growth rates are very fast. Now, on the flip side, when we look at largemouth bass growth rates, and again, remember our largemouth bass population was a high density. This black line is our 2015 survey. This line with the gray squares and the dashes are 2006 survey. And then this line here with the larger dashes and circles are the Northeast Wisconsin averages. And as you can see, for most ages, this black 2015 line is sagging well below both the Northeast average and the last survey. So this means we're having very slow growth in our largemouth bass. Now, how long does it take for a bass to reach legal size? We take our line at 14, run it across. Where does it hit the 2015 line? Drop it down right around 8 or 9 years old. And so that's a very long time for a bass to live in the lake and grow to finally be able to be harvested by anglers. Now, the other species that we were interested in evaluating are the walleye. So where are the walleye? I showed some of the slides of the recent stocking by the Lee and Underwood Lake Conservation Club, which is pretty regular stocking of our fall fingerling fish, which we would expect pretty good survival. But we only caught 4 recently stocked walleye. No adult walleye were captured. Not to say there are none in there. This survey isn't a perfect survey, and it is not intended to collect every adult game fish in the lake. But the fact that we didn't see any was a bit discouraging. We suspect that there's a very low survival of stocked walleye given the high bass density in the lake. So you often, in most lakes, there's always typically 1 or 2 top predators, and it's typically bass and northern. And it's very difficult to, quote unquote, flip a lake to be a walleye northern lake and reduce the bass in great enough numbers. So we believe that there's probably a high mortality rate of these stocked fish by bass, which we've seen in other lakes, especially smaller lakes like this. In the 2015, after the 2015 survey, I recommended to discontinue stocking walleye. Not that it's going to hurt the lake or have any negative impacts necessarily. It's more mulch to feed being put into the lake, that's for sure. But it's a really low return on the investment. If you're thinking about a stock portfolio and things that you're buying and what you're getting back from it, and maybe our survey isn't truly indicative of the return. Maybe anglers are catching good numbers of walleye in some years. And so again, that's something that the association will have to keep in mind. If they are hearing of folks that are catching decent numbers of walleye, maybe it's worth it to continue. But based on our survey, it just doesn't seem like it's a good investment of money. And so walleye really typically don't flourish very well in small clear lakes. They like larger lakes with lots of area that are more productive, more turbid, and they just think of things like Green Bay, Lake Winnebago, some of these big walleye fisheries. They just don't often do well in these smaller clear lakes. They'll survive a little bit, and maybe provide a little bit of a fishery, but they'll never take off and reproduce on their own in any great numbers. And so moving on, our conclusions are that Underwood Lake has a high density of slow-growing largemouth bass. On the other hand, our bluegill abundance is fairly low. Size, structure, and growth rates are very good for this small lake, and panfish do not show signs of stunting. I mentioned this earlier that bluegill had a history of becoming overabundant and stunted in the lake. But those were in the days when there were very few predators around to keep the panfish numbers in check. So this is important to remember. So a lot of folks might think, well, why don't we just increase harvest on largemouth bass? And that way our bluegill numbers will increase. Well, they might, but they also, if you harvest too many largemouth bass, you could have the opposite effect, and you might get into this stunting issue with bluegill again. So I guess the main question is, what are you most interested in managing the lake for? quality size bluegill, even though they may be few and far between, or bluegill that you'll catch often, but they might only be, 3 to 5 inches in size. And also, are you interested in having a fishery for bass that people can catch and harvest, good sized bass? So there's a lot of different things to think about when considering some of the numbers and regulation changes or options that we could do on this lake. So given all that information, Underwood Lake, small in area, it lacks the expansive spawning habitat for other predators such as northern pike and walleye to thrive. And so that largemouth bass will almost always be that top predator in the lake, despite any stocking or adjustments that can be done. No regulation changes are recommended after that survey. And again, that even though we saw that high density of slow growing bass, which oftentimes makes me think, pause, maybe we ought to change a regulation for bass, encourage people to harvest them and thin them out. But when we also look at the bluegill population and size structure, and we know the history of the lake and the issues with stunting, I wanted to take a little more conservative approach and say, maybe we don't want to mess around with the largemouth bass regulation change. So what are the regulation changes that we would consider? Currently, it's at a 14-inch minimum size. We would go with a no minimum size. And so, that's one regulation change that has been, that is one thing that we could consider. But again, I would be worried if people actually harvested largemouth bass with that new regulation size, that maybe the panfish might become higher in abundance and then growth rates will start to reduce again. One of the things that we recommend, and most recommend in almost all of the lakes that we are in, is additional fish sticks or woody habitat along the shoreline. Always a good idea. I mean, Underwood Lake is not overly developed by any means, but you can never have too much woody debris along the shoreline to mimic some good habitat. Our next electrofishing survey is scheduled for 2025, which really isn't all that far away. And so we'll be interested to see, several of those walleye that were stocked, if they made it through all those largemouth basses, the gauntlet of bass, we should see them in that next survey if they made it. I wanted to throw up a link to the 2015 fish report. It is posted on our DNR website. I also have a copy of it. I do have the email addresses for most of you online that I got. I got those through Ken. But feel free to drop me an email as well. But I will, tomorrow morning, I will send that report to you all to look over. And with that, I will open it up to any questions that might be out there.
I mean, we actually have a couple. So the first one is, how do you determine the age of the various fish?
Yeah, so good question. Often what we do, depending on the species, we would take a scale from panfish. So right here near where this fin is, we'd take some scales off with tweezers and stick them in a little envelope. And later on in the winter time, the fisheries technicians would press them through a roller and look at them through a microscope. And so they would have rings, just like a tree would. And so we can determine how old that fish is. And then sometimes we also take, depending on the species, we may take a spine. So on largemouth bass, we would take a spine from one of these, the dorsal fin right here. We would clip off a spine or two, And that we would take a cross section of it, again, look at it through a microscope. So every single winter, when it gets cold like this, these fish aren't really doing a whole lot of feeding, and they're feeding just enough to stay alive through the winter. They're not feeding to put on growth. So at that time, that ring forms what we call an annulus. And so we can see every single winter, you get a series of growths showing up on those structures of fish. Good question.
Okay, the next one was, so what would you recommend we, as the club, stock in the future?
Well, let's go back to this stocking table. We did our survey in 2015. It was before these yellow perch were stocked and before the crappie were stocked. So I don't know how good those did. I don't know if folks were catching them. These are good sized yellow perch, 6 inches. So, those are some good fish to be in there. But, if they're not caught in the next couple of years, they're gone. And so it all kind of depends on how much you're hearing, how many of these fish are being caught. I haven't heard, black crappie, those are going to be probably still too small to really hear much how those are doing. Again, walleye, that's not something that I would recommend. If the club really does want to stock, then I would stick with a panfish like perch or crappie. Again, and not stocking. So Wisconsin DNR does not stock panfish. We don't raise panfish in our hatcheries. Panfish are so prolific. You don't need that many panfish to create good year classes. You just need the right conditions. So we don't stock panfish at all. We do sometimes obtain some panfish from federal hatcheries, say if there's a winter kill, if the lake is completely wiped out due to low oxygen in a winter kill situation. But typically panfish are doing well enough on their own. And so we don't necessarily recommend stocking. We would certainly approve stocking if the club was interested in stocking panfish. We'd say, have at it. We'd work with you to make sure it's some reasonable numbers and not, say 5,000 8-inch perch in 1 year. We might say, let's spread this out over several years. But stocking is not something that has to happen. There's many lakes that we have in our area that are doing just fine without any sort of stocking whatsoever. And I believe Underwood would be no exception.
Tammy, Pete Mueller here. I know you said you don't have a lot of history on what's been stocked in the past. I actually have my hands on the entire catalog of Conservation Club minutes going back to 1959.
Okay.
And I have been absolutely lax in doing anything club-wise this year just because of the year. But a couple of recollections. I know they put the, I think it was northerns that were hybrid northerns back 50s, 60s, because they had such an abundance of small fish and they were trying to reduce that amount of fish to try and balance things a little bit better. And I know the walleyes, I think you're correct on the walleyes, that it's been pretty much around 2000 that we started doing that. And I know we did try that rock bed off of the point between Lee and Rice. So we've had the conversation about walleyes and reproduction, and I think we're pretty much agreed that that's not happening in Lee, definitely not in Underwood. Pretty much the reasoning behind the crappie going in last year is that some of the club members that have grown up on the lake said that was Underwood's star in the past, that it was just full of crappies and perch. and that they were thinking that we want to get back to that, so. And that's why I asked the question on whether or not, what would be the most benefit, and we are trying to stock larger fish. We're not getting the pail of minuscule fish and just dumping thousands in. We've been spending our money on the larger fish when available.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's too soon to really know how the crappie are doing. Now, I don't believe there was any crappie stocked or anything stocked in 2020. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Well, there was some fish, again, because 2020 was so unusual. I don't recall off the top of my head. I think he was only able to get perch this year that we divided between Lee Lake and Underwood.
Okay.
We do like a 1/3, 2/3, or 1/4, 3/4.
Sure. Yeah,
split.
I'll have to
We
double
just-
check on that. I seem to recall there might have been an issue with the hatchery and that the private hatchery that the fish were going to be purchased from didn't have
Yeah,
any.
there was a feed problem, I think.
Yeah, so I don't think any were stocked in 2020, or at least I don't have any stocking receipt from Jerry on that. But
Yeah.
either way, and that's okay. So do you think the club is thinking about going with perch or crappie down the road, or?
Well,
Or-
we constantly have this conversation when we can have meetings about what type of fish to stock. And a lot of people got pretty adamant in 2019 when we were talking about what to stock and said, just no more walleye and Underwood. They wanted to stop that for the time being.
Sure.
I kind of support that, especially, with your comments about how Underwood is an astonishing bluegill lake. So let it be what it is.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And when we get back in there in 2025, we'll be able to see, maybe some of these black crappie might still be around from the 2019
Sure.
stocking and any other.
Is it a longevity thing with them?
They'll definitely still be in there. I mean, they'll live to be 8, 9+ years old
Okay.
at the biggest size. Now, the thing to keep in mind for crappie is, and it's good that no crappie were stocked in 2020, is that in lakes where they're naturally reproducing on their own, and there are some crappie doing fine enough in Underwood Lake, but they tend to have these boom and bust year classes. They only have a good year class every 3 to 5 years, for example. So if you try to mimic something that's not happening in nature and you're pumping crappie in every single year, that's probably not going to work out so well. If you can stock them every few years, that mimics a little bit more of what actually happens in real life, and those tend to be more successful.
All right. And then back to that 2015 shocking. I know I heard a lot of comments from people fishing, again, on both Underwood and Lee, that the feeling of the anglers is that there are more large walleye in both lakes than what the shocking represented. But again, you said it's difficult to
Right. Yeah.
clearly get them.
Yeah, I have no doubt that some made it and there are some around. And a real true survey of walleye would be like a spring netting survey when walleye are
Sure.
spawning.
Yeah.
But because of the size of the lake, it just doesn't fall under that type of a survey for us,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
Being that it's mucky and sand for most of the lake, is that even likely that they're spawning in Underwood?
For walleye, probably not very likely at all. And I know, like across the road in leaf flowage, there was the rock reef that was added in. I don't forget exactly when it was, in the 1990s or maybe early 2000s or something
Right.
along the point.
Late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah. And that was added in to try to increase or provide some habitat for walleye, but that the way that is oriented, it was so algaed up when we did our survey in leaf fluid
Right.
that
Yeah, I
there's-
remember we
it's
talked
just
about
not feasible for walleye eggs to really survive. It just doesn't get the wave action and the wind action to keep those rocks clean.
that. Yeah, and if we
And I
let-
would suspect there's probably very little, if any, natural reproduction going on in Underwood for walleye. I mean,
Right.
any fish that would
Okay.
get stocked, would just be put, growth, and take. And then I just don't think they're going to be reproducing.
Yeah, and I know some personal observations from other people have said that they don't see. I know Ray Weiss owns that property that rock shelf was put off the point of, and he says he rarely sees walleye there
Sure.
at all. So, I mean, they're in the
Yeah.
lake, but at that position, he doesn't. So, all right.
Hey, Tammy, this is Brenda. Is there any sort of habitat enhancement activities they can do to, maybe keep their panfish population sustained, would circumvent the needed stocking events in the future?
Well, fish sticks are always a good thing. So they benefit panfish, but they also benefit largemouth bass. So, it's kind of one of these things where, sometimes fish sticks will help the bass population, and that's not always, desired, but they'll also be a good thing for panfish. And particularly if there's wood lacking in the lake, yellow perch really need some wood to drape their eggs over. They lay these long accordion strings of eggs, and they like something to drape those over. And so having some sticks and wood in the water is a good thing to help encourage yellow perch reproduction. So, I mean, I think fish sticks would be a good thing to add into the lake if there are places that, that would work out for it, that have deep enough water for them, and have, of course, willing landowners being the key thing as well, and a source of trees nearby. But luckily there's a lot of trees nearby, and a lot of county forests not too far away too.
Tammy, we got another question. Would dropping trees from our shoreline help with habitat?
Sure. And there are a few, there's just a handful of restrictions as far as cutting trees along your shoreline. It has to be, I believe it's 35 feet from the shoreline. Brenda, if I'm wrong, correct me, but I think it's 35. You can't cut something right next to the shoreline necessarily but it has to be 35 feet away. And the idea is to try to protect that riparian area. But if you have some trees in your yard that are getting old or big, or you just want cut down, yeah, those are great candidates. And Steve on the call here, he's very in tune to this. He did this himself, had cut down some trees on his property, dragged them with a tractor onto the ice, and then we went in there and anchored them the following spring. And so, yeah, absolutely. It's a nice way to get rid of some trees that might, say, be too close to your house or your cottage, but then also put to good use in the lake.
Okay, so
And
then,
one question on that, Pete, here again. Any particular type of tree?
So we typically like to encourage hardwoods. Things like pine typically disintegrate pretty quickly, as do like birch and aspen. Those things don't last very long. So if you have any oaks and maples, things like that around your yard, around your property, hardwoods are the best. There are times when we do mix in some evergreens as well, just because they fall into the lake too naturally. So it's nice to mimic a little bit what's going on in nature. Bigger the better typically, but sometimes trees might be too big to maneuver with whatever equipment might be available. So sometimes you need to think about the size of the tree and what the capabilities are of the equipment. But probably anything, I would say 6 to 8 inches in diameter or larger is best. You don't really want to mess around with anything much smaller than that because it's just not going to stick around very long.
Okay, and another one, just one note on that. We're up on the north end, like the fourth and fifth properties down from the boat landing on the west shore.
Okay.
We actually have some very mature oaks that are on the bluff between the flat portion above and the lake. And one of them has got a severe split in it that it's probably going to have to come down if it doesn't come down by itself. It's definitely within the 35 feet though. How do we deal with that?
Well, it's still a possibility. So on Shoot Pond, last year, there was a landowner who had a similar situation. He had a tree that was dying, but it was right near the shoreline. And he said, you know, I really want to cut this tree. It's dying anyway, but I want to put it to use. You know, I want it anchored in front of my property as a fish stick. So we were able to get approval through our water regs folks for him to do that. I worked with him to get the permit done. It basically kind of did all the paperwork for him. He cut the tree and we went there in the spring to get it anchored in. And then, you know, everything is good to go. So even though I say this 35 feet away thing is kind of the general rule, there are some options when something is closer than that. And generally it's, you know, if it is something that's dying or has an issue, that's something that likely I would believe our water regs folks would take another look at.
We started to get into that as far as adding fish sticks through club activity in 2019, and then it just kind of died because I was starting to get names, and then, you know, we couldn't meet last year. So, I do plan on picking that back up, and I get that 35 feet riparian zone that we want to keep natural. So.
Sure. Yeah, but there are exceptions as anything is. So, you know.
And how deep do they get set?
Well, it depends on the length of the tree. So, you know, typically we would put the butt end of the tree right next to shore so that we can anchor it into shore. Okay. And so depending on how long the tree is, you know, that's where your top of the tree is. And so you would like your top of the tree to obviously be mostly, if not all, underwater. And looking at, I assume this is kind of where you live here in this general area.
Yep.
Yeah. So it drops off pretty nicely here. So this might be just a fantastic area for this to happen. Over here on this shore, it's pretty shallow. You know, if you dropped a tree here, much of that tree is still going to be out of the water and probably not that useful for fish habitat. It's not going to be a bad thing. It's just probably not the best locations if you had to pick your prime locations. But along these areas where it drops off fairly steadily might be some really good spots.
Well, 2019 Mother Nature helped us in July on Lee Lake.
Yeah.
Dropping a few.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Now, what about the consideration of the milfoil issue that we have from the standpoint of tree drops?
I guess what exactly
well, are we going to interfere with our cleanup, our continued?
Oh no, I don't think so. I mean, yeah, that shouldn't, yeah, that I don't think that would be a reason to not do a tree drop, you know, because of milfoil control. Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Ken, are you there?
Yeah, this is Ken Dotta. I just want to mention that two things. One, at the county level here, we do have cost sharing for tree drops on lakes. Okay. So we can pay up to $2,500, 70% up to $2,500. Okay. We've never ran that high, but so that is an option for you. And the other thing we've tried this on other places because you guys got county land button up there.
Yes.
don't go to them for trees. They will not allow it.
Yeah,
We've tried it and they don't, even if they're
Yeah,
down
okay.
ones.
right.
But
Yeah, and that money, can that be used to say pay a logger to come and,
Forest your land, right?
yeah.
It's specifically to bring the tree to the lake, anchor it, etc.
Okay.
correct.
Yeah. Okay. One other thing, Ken, as long as you're there, I noticed in looking at the survey report that you talked about, or Ryan talked about earlier, there are only 2 points on Underwood that's the milfoil survey said had milfoil, and I understand that in front of Peter Andrews' property, where there's a kind of a sandbar that's pretty much directly across from our point, also has some, from what people are telling me, that have gone down and looked. And I know that the team that has been working on removal has said that it's been more recent that started to show up there, but there is a patch in there as well.
I think you got a perfect segue into our next section, so we don't run out of time.
Okay,
And I'm
very good.
going to make you stay on for the meeting, so because Ryan actually should have that in his presentation.
Okay.
Correct, Ryan?
I do. I have the results of that. But as we'll talk about, that's obviously an evolving situation, which you guys will probably have updated info for.
Sure.
And don't be afraid to jump in then, Pete, and ask,
All right.
get on it.
All right. Thanks. I'll shut up now.
Thanks, Tammy. Okay, yeah, as Ken said, we just need to keep going here. I'm going to try and move through this. Again, stop me if you have any questions. Other than the fishery, I'm guessing the topic of most interest will be the aquatic plants. So we'll get to that here in just a second. Excuse me. So just real quick, part of understanding your lake is understanding the bigger picture of how it works. Lakes go through a natural aging process. So they are a low place on the landscape, and they fill up over time, whether it be sediment, plants and animals dying, things like that. And so part of our visioning for what we want our lake to be here, much like we just talked about with the fishery, is having realistic expectations about what this lake is capable of. And so as we found, it's probably not going to be a walleye fishery. Well, same way a lake goes through an aging process. And again, it's been doing this for 10,000 years. And really, we only have the ability to kind of nudge it in one way or the other. Eventually that, if given enough time and barring any large geologic events, Underwood Lake will become a marsh someday and a wetland. It's a natural process. Our activities on the landscape tend to accelerate this process. So we often look for ways to kind of slow this down and keep the lake in a place where we want it. And so you've got some good depth to Underwood Lake. It's probably, in the Middle Ages right now, and mesotrophic. We probably all are familiar with lakes that are quite a bit older. Generally, as they get older, they get muckier, but they also get an increase in wildlife and activity. And so, one goes with another there. Also important to basically just understand the basic water cycle. Where's our water coming from? Where's it going? Water typically falls on the landscape and then either runs across the surface of the land or has a chance to infiltrate. Either way, that water is slowly making its way to the closest water body and then out to the bay and eventually out to the ocean. That's where that water is inevitably headed. The more we can slow that water down, the better. Water running across the surface has a lot of energy, carries a lot of contaminants with it, a lot of sediment, things like that. So as we develop our watershed and we develop the surface, we increase that runoff. And so a general theme when managing for a lake is to try and increase opportunities for infiltration, try to increase the amount of water going into the water table and feeding the lake slowly over time, having a chance to be filtered by soil and rock, and giving a nice steady flow of water as opposed to shunting that water off real quick through the system and back out. So again, what shapes a lake's character? We've talked about the age. You know, these are glacial lakes. They're thousands of years old. And the lake type, as Tammy mentioned, is a seepage lake. So we've got no inlet or outlet on Underwood. So our water is primarily coming from that infiltrated water, from seepage, from water coming from groundwater. So particularly a seepage lake that's getting its water from groundwater, you want to feed that source, increase infiltration. Geology, soil types, topography are all going to play a role. Those aren't things we have any control over. They are what they are. We have seasonal environmental changes. Obviously, our lakes up here freeze over part of the year. My wife would say 2/3 of the year, but we know it's a little less than that. But you know, like I say, you work on lakes down in Georgia and Florida, they don't freeze over. And so this is a very key part of the system here is that dynamic, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Also, obviously, land use within the watershed has a large impact on how the lake behaves, and nearshore activities. The closer we get to the lake, the greater the potential for impact. Did I have a question there? I didn't see. Okay. So we're a 45-acre drainage lake, the max depth of about 37 feet. This is a newer bathymetric map developed by the DNR during one of their surveys. This updates a lot of the old bathymetric maps that were done back in the 50s, 60s, but just by drilling holes through the ice and dropping down a weight, we now can get a continuous scan of the bottom. This may not have changed significantly from that old survey, but it is definitely more accurate and comprehensive. And this can also be available electronically now. So some people like to plug these into their fish finders, things like that. I mentioned the survey. We didn't have a lot of survey answers yet for this lake. I really encourage you to take that if you haven't, ask your family and neighbors to. You'll see it becomes an appendix in the actual plan. It just documents really what people observe about their lake. Out of the responses I have got, and this is one of the typical questions in the survey, what do you value most about the lake? Which is really important to understand because that's really what's going to shape our vision and our direction with this management plan. Some of the answers we got are the quality and the beauty, the clean water, relaxing fishing, peaceful getaway. And so that's really going to kind of characterize where this lake management plan goes, maintaining those things that people value. And just in your opinion, what do you see as the biggest impacts to Underwood Lake? Probably no surprise here. Invasive species, fishing pressure, and excessive plant growth are a few of the answers I received. This is based on just a handful of responses I've gotten so far. But over the coming weeks, and I'll talk about this at the end as we develop this draft with each other, please, have folks keep taking this survey to inform our decisions there. Temperature, so every time we go out and sample, the lake, in addition to taking a water sample, we take a number of measurements, one of which is temperature. Pretty simple thing, and each one of these colored lines represents a different trip out to the lake, a different sampling event, and we measure temperature with depth. So the top of the graph there is the surface of the lake. Depth goes down with the graph, and what you can generally see here is a trend that near the surface, water temperatures are similar to ambient air temperatures. And which you would expect where that water is mixing with the air. And then as we go down with depth, water cools off and then becomes a similar temperature at depth between 45 and around 45, 50 degrees, which is typically around the temperature of groundwater. And so what this profile really here shows us, though, is that most times of the year, our temperatures, and all those samples there that start over on the right, our temperatures stay relatively uniform until we get about down to around 15 feet. And then the temperatures drop off significantly before they become more stable again around 50 degrees. And what that illustrates is a thermocline in the lake. And so your lake is deep enough that most times of the year, warm water on the surface and it separates from cooler water at depth, and that basically splits your water in half. What that thermocline does is it doesn't really allow surface water to mix with lower water. Now, there's a couple of samples there, the orange line and the gray line over there on the left, and that's a November sample and then an April sample, and that occurs, and that's pretty indicative of overturn. So twice a year, as we go into winter and our surface temperatures get colder and colder, we get to a point where those surface temperatures become similar to our temperature at depth. And at that point, and as you can see with the orange line, we had a similar temperature all the way to the bottom. And when that happens, that's the one time in the year, sometimes it lasts only a week or two, where the water, the thermocline disappears and that water is allowed to mix. And so what that does is it reoxygenates water at depth, but it also can resuspend sediments and nutrients from the bottom. And then as we go into April, as we go into spring and the water temperature or air temperatures start warming back up, again, at some point we approach a temperature where surface temperatures and temperatures at depth become similar. So we get 2 overturn events a year. Which is important to know, particularly if you do have oxygen problems, which I don't think we do here. It's also important if you're ever applying chemicals to the lake. Water clarity is another thing that we measure here. It's just a measure of how deep light penetrates into the water. We just measure it with a Secchi disc. We lower that thing down and see how far it goes before it disappears. It's a pretty crude and simple measurement, but and in and of itself, one measurement doesn't really tell you much, but as you gather a bunch of those over time, you can start to see trends, and it's a very inexpensive, quick way to detect changes in your lake. And particularly once you develop a good long-term robust data set, you can start to see those trends. Of course, our color, our clarity changes with with color, with tannins in the water. Certainly if sediment is stirred up, algae blooms, all these can affect water clarity. And so oftentimes our water clarity might be different on a Sunday in the summer than it is on a Wednesday in the fall when the lake's not getting much activity. And so that just shows you the importance of how these measurements can vary. But if you get enough long-term data over time, you can start to see trends. And so here we've got water clarity over all the water clarity data we basically had for Underwood, including our study starting back in 2017, 2018 over there on the right. Prior to that, you can see we had no measurements of water clarity since back in the 70s. And so I did plot a trend line there between the data from the 70s and the data from our 2-year study, which would suggest that water clarity is getting greater. But I wouldn't hang my hat on that. I would look at this and say this is minimal data. So just to simply plot that line between those 2 time periods might be misleading. But if you continue these water clarity measurements over time, a better trend should come into focus. And again, that's a very inexpensive way to monitor your lake and keep tabs on it. If your trend in water clarity starts to change significantly, then you know something's going on. Dissolved oxygen is another thing we measure. Obviously, dissolved oxygen is kicked off during photosynthesis by plants and algae, and then consumed by wildlife, fish, things like that. Oxygen is also consumed as things decay along the bottom. So a lot of times our oxygen concentrations are much lower at depth. It's typical. And this is where that thermocline comes into play again that I showed you with the temperature. So similar to our temperature graph, each one of these lines shows a different sampling event. And again, similar to temperature, in the top 10 feet or so, where water is typically mixed up by wind and boat action, things like that, the concentrations are relatively uniform with depth until you get to about 10 or 15 feet. And then we get this significant drop off in dissolved oxygen concentrations, right where that thermocline is. So again, the thermocline prevents that surface water that's being reoxygenated from mixing with water at depth. And so you get low oxygen levels at depth. The pink area of that graph is everything below 5 parts per million of dissolved oxygen. And that's kind of a threshold, a general rule of thumb for where many fish species start to become stressed due to lack of oxygen. So you can see even on our worst time of year, coming out of winter there in April, we have at least 15 feet of water with sufficient oxygen in it. So as you would probably know, you don't typically get a fish kill in Underwood. The fish, if they run out of oxygen in the winter, they just come shallower to get that oxygen. The other thing I want to point out here is that in some of these events, the yellow, green, and light blue lines, when we get down there about 20 feet, those oxygen concentrations actually go up before they dive off. And that's indicative of an algae bloom at depth. So you've got algae doing its thing there right around the thermocline, and it's kicking off oxygen. And so you're actually getting more oxygen there at the thermocline than you have at the surface due to that algae activity. That you know, at depth like that, that's probably not something you see when you're recreating at the lake. Doesn't necessarily present a significant problem, but that there are algae blooms occurring in this lake. So that leads us to nutrients. This is another one of the components we look at. You probably hear a lot about this, phosphorus and nitrogen. These are necessary for life. We're all composed of phosphorus and nitrogen. But when we get an excess of these nutrients, that's typically what leads to excessive plant and algae growth. And phosphorus is the primary one we look at there. And you can see on the bottom there are general sources of phosphorus in the environment. So wetlands, as they release water, typically kick off a lot of phosphorus. Phosphorus likes to bind to soil particles. So anytime we get soil running into the lakes via erosion or storm runoff, things like that, that's going to be carrying phosphorus with it. And then as plants and animals die and decay, they also release phosphorus to the water column. A lot of that phosphorus, because it does cling to soil, is bound up in the sediments in the muck in the bottom. So anytime that sediment is resuspended, that's releasing phosphorus back into the water column. On the right there, you can see these are more man-made sources of phosphorus. So erosion again, runoff, fertilizer, wastewater, so including our septic systems. Even a brand new, perfectly functioning septic system still releases nutrients to the groundwater. So these are all sources of phosphorus. And out of all these sources, if you're looking to control or limit your phosphorus, we only have that list on the right to work with. We're not going to change anything on the left. We're not going to change anything at the bottom. And so those sources on the right are really all we have to work with. And so that's why homeowners, shoreline homeowners, and people in the watershed are harped on so much about how they manage their property, just because that's the only thing we have anything we can do with. So here's our phosphorus data. Similar to our water clarity, it's somewhat limited. We have a bunch of measurements here in the past 2 years from our baseline that we started, and hopefully this will continue into the future. And then we have our handful of samples back there from the mid-70s. And so again, when you plot that trend line, it would suggest that our phosphorus concentrations are declining since the 70s. Which is probably somewhat true. There's a lot less development going on a lot of these lakes, like Underwood, for example, compared to when a lot of the housing was first being developed a number of years ago. So a lot of our runoff has decreased, things like that. But we still see phosphorus in the water column. And that red line there at 20 parts, that's the threshold for a deep seepage lake like Underwood. And by threshold, I mean that's just the concentration that, a conglomeration of studies have shown that that's really, for a deep seepage lake, that's when the nutrient is becoming a problem and probably becoming a nuisance. So all of our samples were below that 20, and our trend so far compared to minimal data looks good, but that'll be one thing to monitor going forward, just to maintain those healthy phosphorus concentrations. The green dots are chlorophyll, so that's our measurement of essentially our measurement of algae in the water. So we are measuring algae there. Typically, algae blooms become a real nuisance closer to 5 or 6. Your concentrations are all around 2 to 3, so that's pretty good in general. Again, these are all surface samples, so this doesn't capture what's happening at depth, as we saw in the dissolved oxygen profile. Pollutants is another thing we look at, things like potassium, chloride, sodium. In and of themselves in normal concentrations, none of these things are really a detriment to the lake, but these things are not, don't exist in the lake naturally. So if we are seeing potassium, chloride, or sodium, that's basically a tracer or an indicator of some other impact. All those concentrations were relatively low in all of our samples. A lot of those bigger problems that would show potassium, chloride, and sodium don't appear to be a big issue at this point. Our watershed is important to know about. And for those who don't know, the watershed is the area of land that drains to your lake. So when a drop of water, when a drop of rain hits the landscape, it either runs across the surface or gets a chance to infiltrate. Either way, it's making its way towards your lake and then out again, like I said, on through the water cycle. Identifying what area of land exactly drains to our lake is important when it comes to knowing if you want to make management decisions, what area of land are we talking about? So this is the watershed that we delineated for the lake. It's about 250 acres, which is relatively small, which is a good thing. That means you have a relatively less area of land draining to your lake that could be potential issues. Of that 250 acres, about half of it is forest. About 17% of it is the lake itself. And it looks about 12% of it is considered developed land. About 2% grassland is the other thing we see in there, and then some wetland. And so that's the pie chart there on the bottom, shows our distribution of land use in the watershed. The pie chart to the right there is when we model this land use with the topography, the soil types, the environment that we have. This shows us where what the distribution of our phosphorus sources are to Underwood Lake. And again, 48% is coming from the forest. So any type of land use is going to export phosphorus. It's just part of the normal weathering cycle that occurs. Again, we have a large chunk there, as I said, coming from wetland. So the little bit of wetland we do have around Underwood Lake is also a pretty big source of our phosphorus. And then we've got a little bit, 5% comes from the little bit of open land that we have there. Again, the majority of that pie chart, we're not going to be able to really do anything with. We don't want to get rid of forests, certainly, even though it does export phosphorus. It's really that 5% chunk, and maybe perhaps that other 5% of open land that we really have any to work with if we want to manipulate this at all. So habitat near shore, this relates back to our fisheries again. It's the near shore and the shoreline is really the most sensitive part of the lake. That's where a great deal of lake life spends a part of its life cycle. It's also where we want to be, which is why we have our homes on the lake. These couple of pictures here at the top, of course, just shows some contrasting ways that people keep their shoreline. What I like to show on the bottom there is these are a couple of examples of some shoreline restoration projects that have occurred. And these are using native plants and flowers. And I just like to show those as an example that you can really make improvements improvements to shoreline habitat and to how you manage your property, but still maintain an aesthetic that is pleasing to most folks. A lot of that funding resource will also even help pay for consulting on this, whether it be a landscaper or having someone like Ken from Land Conservation come out and look at your property. I'm going to skip this real quick. And then just a kind of a cross section here of the lake. We've got our terrestrial area with our land and land plants. And then as we get into shallow water, we have emergent plants. Get a little bit deeper, typically our floating plants, and then our submerged plants. At some point, we get to a depth where plants don't grow anymore, and that's determined typically by the water clarity that we talked about earlier. And so I forget what our water clarity average was in this lake, but that's about how deep you're going to see plants grow. Beyond that depth, when you get into deeper water, there's not a lot of activity out there. You know, of course, we have some fish activity, but most of our activity, most of the sensitive parts of our lake are occurring in that littoral zone that we call it, which is up to the depth where plants grow. And 90%, as I said earlier, 90% of all lake life spends at least part of its life cycle in that shallow water. So it's really the most dynamic and sensitive part of our lake, which is why we need to focus on how shorelines are kept, focus on habitat, things like that. That's just really going to have the biggest impact on your lake.
During that bullshit.
Just real quick, this is based on a number of different studies here that show the depth of shoreline buffer required to accomplish different objectives. So we have nutrient control, stormwater runoff, bacteria, sediment control, and wildlife habitat. And so there's a range of depths there. And again, that depends on types of soil, depends on your environment, maybe aspect, things like that. So that creates that range of depths. But I just want to point out that 35 feet, that is the shoreline zoning depth there, that's our magic number with regard to cutting trees and stuff, really is just the tip of the iceberg for achieving those things. And so it's just to kind of put that in perspective. So the more buffer, the better. And then here, this is just to tell you about NR 115, which you may have heard of, and this is the shoreline zoning ordinance. This is a statewide ordinance for any riparian land that's not in a city. And this was established back in the 1960s. So the importance of the shoreline isn't a new agenda. It's not new science. This is something that we understood over 50 years ago that was so important that it was put into law back then. Now, it hasn't been very enforced. Most people aren't extremely aware or understand it. And I don't like to get into a lot of the details of it, but that diagram on the right there, what I like to show, just really shows the intent of the zoning ordinance. And that's to have a healthy buffer zone between your upland area and the lake, and then also a healthy plant community in the shallow waters by the lake. This ordinance allows for access to the lake. It allows for a pier. It allows for plants to be cleared out around that pier, but otherwise having a majority of unmowed vegetation there along the lake for habitat. Another image there on the left of a restoration project, and I think that's down at the lake, down in southern Wisconsin. But again, these things, these shoreline habitats don't have to obstruct your view of the lake. They don't have to obstruct your access. They can be pleasing. So there's a new protocol for surveying the shoreline habitat. And again, the purpose of this is to monitor change. So just like our water clarity or any other measurements we're taking, we want to monitor change of the habitat. So this is done with a methodology that can be repeated in the future, to see, have we made progress? Have we made change? The outer line there around the lake is tree canopy, so black or white, whether that canopy is present or gone. And then the inner line there is typically black or red, and that shows disturbed shoreline and undisturbed shoreline. So this was done back in 2018, I think. So about 6,600 feet of lake frontage was surveyed, and of that, about 30% of the shoreline would be considered disturbed, leaving another 70% undisturbed. And by disturbed, if you look at the chart there, that's almost, disturbed is almost always means mowed lawn. So of the 6,600 feet of shoreland, we had almost 3,000 feet of mowed lawn and about 90 feet of artificial beach. And so this will allow us to, as we work towards shoreline restorations, as we work towards fish sticks, things like that, we can monitor change. Coarse woody habitat, as we were talking about earlier, these are our fish sticks. This is our woody debris in the water that is our habitat. Was measured at about 24 logs per mile on this survey. A healthy lake would certainly be upwards of more of a couple hundred logs per mile. So not that this is an unhealthy lake, but a more natural lake. And so to mimic those conditions, you can see we've got some room for improvement in terms of fish sticks, things like that. Just another shot there. Just a quick look at the importance of native plants here. When it comes to the shoreland, native plants are very important. They're very deep rooted. They're designed for this environment, for this climate. So those deep roots prevent erosion. They remove nutrients from the groundwater before it gets to the lake. Above the surface, those plants are very robust. Again, things designed for this climate, so they hold up better against runoff, snow melt, things like that. And they kind of act as a silt fence, if you would, for the lake. And again, I think it's everyone in the watershed's responsibility to do what they can for the health of the lake. But it's the folks really at the water's edge that have the best opportunity to create that. The little red box there on the left is Kentucky bluegrass for comparison. And that's a scaled drawing there, so you can see what we're accomplishing with lawn as opposed to native plants.
Red box, I like the most. Leaf.
Just other ways, again, this theme of increasing infiltration, rain gardens, retention basins, rain barrels where you collect runoff from your roof and then use that water at a later time. Something as simple as meandering your pathway to the lake are all things that can improve this. Ken's shop works with producers a lot of times, helping implement best management practices on the landscape, and then even your highway department, things like that, have learned a lot. Used to, when you built a highway, you shunted the water off to the nearest water body as quick as it would go. We've learned that that's detrimental to those water bodies, and so again, just to present that there are options, there are a number of tools in the tool chest here to do this, to reduce this runoff and increase infiltration while still enjoying ourselves on the landscape. Aquatic plants, obviously very important. They're food, their shelter, their habitat. They're also important for water quality. It's these plants that are consuming these nutrients that are coming to the lake. And so we have a method of surveying this, surveying the plants. Again, it's a method that can be reproduced in the future to monitor change. And so we look at the abundance of plants, we look at the variety of species of plants, and we can infer a lot about the lake by doing that. The way that's done is we get a grid here for the lake, 175 points on Underwood Lake. Each one of those points has a GPS coordinate. So we'll go out and do the survey. We navigate to each one of those GPS coordinates, and we lower a rake, much like a garden rake, a modified garden rake, down to the bottom, and we grab off the bottom whatever we can and back up. And then at that point, we inventory how much plant material is at that spot and what species exist at that spot. And so this survey was conducted by DNR back in 2013. And this is a map of rake fullness. So this simply shows the abundance of plants that were located at each spot. If it's a 3, like a red dot, which we have one of there, that's a heaping rake full of plant material came up, versus the green dot, which is a 1, which is just a few sprigs. If the dot is missing there, no plant material came up on the rake at that location. For either it's at a depth that was beyond where plants grow, or thin enough that nothing came up on the rake at that point. So that's just relative plant abundance is shown by that map. 15 different plant species were identified during the survey, including Eurasian water milfoil and a number of other species. And if you look at Underwood Lake, that chart at the bottom there is a chart out of the countywide report that was mentioned briefly at the beginning. And that compares and contrasts all the lakes in the study. And so you can see in terms of species, Underwood Lake comes out in the lower half of the lakes we've done so far in number of species. Generally, an increased number of species is considered a healthy thing. It's more biodiversity. It's considered a more robust plant community. And I'll also point out, of those species, each species is assigned a C value. A C value, just real quick, is basically the relative sensitivity of that plant. So the higher the C value, and it goes up to 10, the higher the C value, the higher quality or more sensitive that plant is considered. So when you see high C value plants, like the dwarf water milfoil there, we have it at 10, that's an indication of a healthy system. Lower C values are less important plants. They're more tolerant to disturbance, so they're more common. And of course, our milfoil, our Eurasian water milfoil in there gets a 0 because that's an invasive. So the 3 most common species of plants observed were southern naiad at about 1/3 of the sites, dwarf water milfoil, which is a native and a high value native plant, was about at 1/4 of the sites, which is fantastic, and variable pondweed at about 1/4 of the sites. So seeing a C value of 10 in one of your top 3 species is exceptional. Indicates good quality. There's where the dwarf water milfoil was located, and the pondweed. So milfoil, again, this goes back to the 2018 survey. During that survey, which was not done specifically for milfoil, so they're not looking specifically for it. They're only navigating to those points I showed you at the beginning. But of those points, there's 3 locations that milfoil was observed. And at one location, the red dot, it was a heaping load of milfoil on the rake at that spot. The other green dots were present, but not significant. And so again, this is already a 2-year-old survey, going on 3 years here. And so as we draft this plan together, and I'll talk about that in a minute, I'll really look to you guys to update me on what's been done and what's going on, and if new surveys have been done, things like that. Other invasive species documented for Underwood Lake include purple loosestrife, which is a pretty purple plant, but it can invade and choke out native species. So eradicate that when you can. And then Chinese mystery snails, the other thing that's been identified at Underwood Lake. We don't really have a successful method of dealing with the Chinese mystery snails. They're more and more common in our lakes. So far in most lakes, they don't present a significant problem. They're just present. They do, of course, push out other native species a bit, but no significant impacts have been documented, other than they are invasive and can be a problem in some lakes more than others. Recreation, so Underwood Lake being less than 50 acres is a no-wake lake. Your particular boat launch is owned and managed by the county. In Oconto, that can be a variety of sources. A lot of boat launches are town-run. Some are run by the Forest Service. Yours in particular is run by Oconto County. So again, that's just important to know who's in charge of that when it comes to making improvements or modifications to that boat launch. Again, just to wrap up, another one of the open-ended questions there on the survey is, what do you think should be done to improve Underwood Lake? Obviously, address the milfoil is the #1 concern. And with that, that's basically what we know at this time. So as I said before, generally the way we're doing this is because there are a lot of technical aspects to this comprehensive plan. What I typically do is we'll draft up the plan with what we know now based on this information that we have here and all the information we've been able to source. And so what we'll do in the coming weeks is I get this plan together. It will then be emailed out to all of you. We have your email addresses and things like that. And so we'll email out a draft, and then I will just look to take comments or suggestions, complaints if you have them. And we'll go back and forth on this until we have consensus basically on each of the goals and objectives in this plan. So again, I showed you that draft at the beginning. I have a lot of the basic information entered based on our discussions here tonight, based on the results of the survey, based on talking with the county and DNR. I will start to suggest some goals and actions that your lake may be interested in that draft. And as that draft comes out in the coming weeks, definitely take a look at it, take the chance to read it. Some lake, and in this day and age, I don't, with the COVID, you have to be creative, but a lot of lake groups like to get together as a committee or as an association or as a sportsman's group to review the plan, mark it up, redline it if you like, simply email me suggestions or comments. And we'll just kind of go through this iterative process. Every once in a while, if I'm getting some changes to the plan, every once in a while, we'll email out an updated draft for you to look at. And then we'll just communicate that way. You can feel free to contact Ken, Dale, Brenda, Tammy, or myself to discuss any of these things. And again, just share your thoughts. When we have a plan that everyone's like, we'll give it the final stamp of approval and send it into DNR at that point to be on file. And so again, be sure to revisit that in the future when it becomes necessary. So with that, any questions following that? We've got about 5 or 10 more minutes here before we have to get on to another meeting. But if anyone has any other questions or comments, feel free. We'll answer them now. And then again, contact any of us at any time to discuss further if you like. And be sure
we were gonna see if Steve wanted to talk for Ocala at all.
Yeah, just a couple of minutes after the questions. I won't take much time.
Any questions? Anyone got a burning question they need to ask? Me, or I think Tammy's still here and Brenda's here as well, and Ken. Steve?
Yes, my name's Steve Dupuy. I'm one of the representatives with the O'Connell Lakes and Waterways Association. Basically, our mission here is to promote the preservation for lakes, rivers, streams, watersheds for today's generation and the future generations. Basically, we have certain key programs. One of them is what we're doing tonight, to participate in these programs to see if we can be of any assistance to any lakes or organizations. We also have a AIS training, and that's usually to help identify aquatic invasive species, and that's in August 21st of this year. I believe it's at Riverview. We also have a Citizens Lake Monitoring Network, which is also some additional training, which I believe, Ryan, is that you that conducts that?
Conducts what? Sorry, I was just.
I'm sorry. The Citizens Lake Monitoring.
Not for that area. That would,
okay.
That would be Brenda.
Yeah. Well, basically what that does is someone from a lake takes samples of certain aquatic vegetation, takes pictures of them, and puts the information on a designated website to help monitor what's going on in the lake. And it's done by an individual. It's a volunteer situation. We also promote Clean Boats and Clean Waters program, which is a program to make sure that the boats go in and out of the lakes clean. We also have the Healthy Waters cost share program, where our grant program offers up to 10% or $7,000 a year for grants. And I believe that Underwood has had some of those grants already. We also got involved a couple years ago, thanks to Brenda up in Merrimack County, where they were putting together some screens, some polyurethane screens, which were floated on the top and weighted on the bottom. And they would surround a designated area of Eurasian water milfoil, which would help keep the concentration of the chemicals on that particular plant much longer, making it more lethal. And last May, up in Reservoir Pond, Dwight Ziegler, who's the president of that association, I believe, up there, and he's also representative of Ocala. They tried a new chemical from Minnesota, which was approved in Wisconsin. It was 3 applications on the Eurasian water milfoil up there. And I talked to Ziggy today, and they're very happy with that. So if anybody's thinking of doing a chemical treatment other than 2,4-D, I would put you in contact with Ziggy, and he would help you get a hold of these folks and the cost factor for this particular chemical. We are now, as of today, on the county website. I just got an email on that. So if you need to get a hold of us and you don't know how, we will be on the county website. Other than that, it's been a long evening, and I thank everybody for coming, and I'll keep it short.
All right, thank you, Steve. So a lot of resources here available to you. I encourage you to take advantage of them. Hopefully this county-wide project will really develop some momentum with the lake community and get some things done that need to be done. So again, feel free to contact any of us. Unless there's any last questions, we'll go ahead and sign off. And if you're interested, we're going to be doing a similar meeting here with Shea Lake in a moment. Thank you for attending, and appreciate it.
Thank
Thanks,
you so
everyone.
much. Have a great night.